Okay, this will be the last lecture in Unit 2, so you have an exam coming up soon. So this lecture is on federalism, state and local government. So I'm kind of combining a couple of chapters here, chapters 3 and 14. And then also keep in mind there's a Ask the Expert interview on this topic too with Dr. Cindy Simon Rosenthal, who was the mayor of Norman. So we'll just jump right in here. So I should say first we'll sort of talk about federalism, and that's the sharing of power between the federal government and state governments. Then we'll jump into state governments and with an emphasis on Oklahoma, and then finally we'll move down to local governments with really a focus on Norman. Okay, so what does the Constitution do? It divides power between two levels of government. In our case, the states and the federal government. And we'll show in a second, like there's other options to set up governments and nations, but we have this federalism system. Local government, which we'll talk about towards the end of this lecture, it's not a formal part of federalism. Rather, local governments are a creature of state government. So you won't find any like protections for local governments within the Constitution, where you will find protections for states within the Constitution. So local governments exist at the will of state governments. Federalism, the sort of sharing of power and authority, is part of our checks and balances. So one part of checks and balances is, dividing the government into three branches. Another is dividing power and authority between states and state governments and the national federal government. So some powers are reserved to the federal government, some to the states, and some are shared. Big picture now, the federal government clearly holds most of the cards here. So the federal government I see is more powerful if it wants to assert itself. So if the federal government wants to do something, force the states to take action, it generally can do that. The other way around is pretty difficult. Now on the flip side, like state governments control a lot of sort of your day-to-day activities. That happen, and we'll get to those. So to have a good government, I guess, you need a balance between sort of consistency of laws across states, but allow for some differences. So you can't have like one crazy set of laws in Oklahoma and then another like very different, maybe equally as crazy set of laws in Texas. You might have some variation, but you need consistencies. Like, right, we all use the US dollar. Right, and the federal government decides on the currency, right? If we had Texas bucks and Oklahoma bucks, that would make things complicated. Drive on the same side of the road. There's also money, but like banking laws are generally the same. There might be some small differences, but for the most part, we need some consistency of laws across states, but you can have some differences. And there are plenty of differences, but they're generally not on big picture things. And I'm sure you can think of examples where they are, but generally speaking, they're not. So federal laws cover money. State laws can vary over things like social welfare policy. And I say sort of here because if the federal government's providing that money, if they want, they can put a lot of strings on the block of money that gets set down to the states, or they can not. They could just say, here's a pot of money, Oklahoma, you spend it how you want. And social welfare policy. So just, as an example, who qualifies for what we would traditionally call food stamps will vary by state, or how much people get varies by state. So the states control a lot of that. Both have the power to tax. So you pay federal tax and you pay state tax, and actually also pay frequently local tax. So some consistencies and some variation. Okay, so different types of government, and these are the three sort of main ways you can set up a national government. So real quick, a unitary system is one where the initial authority is concentrated in the central government. So they give here like the United Kingdom or Japan or Sweden. So in the UK, the national government is in control. If they want to give some authority to localities, they can, but they don't have to. So the authority to rule is concentrated at the national level, and then some can be delegated to the states. So that's one type of government, unitary system. Another type is the confederation. If you remember back to our Constitution lecture, our country started off as a confederation. And here it's you can think of it as maybe the reverse or maybe the inverse of the unitary system, where the authority to govern is concentrated in the states, and the states can delegate some authority to the national government. I think, yeah, our U.S. under the Articles of Confederation is probably the best example of this. So where the states formed a national government but gave it incredibly limited powers, where the states still had sort of the authority to rule and could basically veto any legislation. Okay, so unitary and confederation, those are two types. That's not what we have now. We have this federation kind of government in the middle here. And so in the federation government, first of all, the authority to rule comes from the people, and then it is divided, not necessarily equally, but it's divided between the states and the national government. And then, of course, there's overlap, but the point is that states have some authority and the national government has some authority. So to have a federal system, you need these four things. This would make a good short answer question. What are the four things required to have a federal system? So you need at least two levels of government, which we have, right? We have federal government and we have states. You have a constitution. So a constitution is a set of rules that determine how the governments operate. That can't be changed without the consent of both levels, right? So if you remember how our changing the constitution works, there's the proposal stage, and then there's the approval stage. And so you can't change the constitution without consent of both levels, right? So the national government can't unilaterally change the constitution, and the states can't do that either. Both have legislative, judicial, and executive authority, right? So we have the federal legislative branch, federal judiciary, and the president, who's the head of the executive branch, and then each states have the same components, right? So there's state courts, there's a state executive, usually the governor, and the state legislature. And then if you have conflict between the states, it's decided by the federal government. So if two states, Oklahoma and Texas, say have some sort of conflict, the national government is the one that decides on the outcome if the states can't come to an agreement, and usually through the court system. So we'll talk a little bit about what does the Constitution say about federalism. So we'll talk about this in the context of, at least here, of like, what can the different levels of government do? So there's a lot of things the Constitution is pretty explicit about that the federal government can do. The two important ones, or maybe three important ones, I guess, are the top ones here. So coining money, right, or printing money. Money printer goes, it's a meme if you don't know it. So yeah, you really only want to have like one set of money for the states or for the entire country. If you had Oklahoma dollars, they could be worth something different than Texas dollars, and that becomes problematic because you can also start to manipulate the currency to make things cheaper or more expensive in a particular state. So in order for the economy to function smoothly, we want only one level of government, the federal government, to coin money. Regulate interstate commerce and foreign commerce. So any commerce between the states has to have equal footing. So basically, and I think I touch on this in a second, what you can't do is have Oklahoma tax goods coming into the state, like say from Texas or anywhere else for that matter. So any commerce that takes place across states, the federal government controls. Actually, and this will contradict something on the slide, but like the federal government has taken like a very broad stance on what counts as interstate commerce, right? So I don't know, say you run a McDonald's in Norman, like the federal government would consider that, I think, interstate commerce, even though like McDonald's is, it's in the state, like people aren't like traveling to get there, but they would consider that interstate commerce anyways. Every once in a while, like a state wins on something that's commerce entirely within their state, but there's a pretty broad look at this. And same with foreign commerce. So interstate and foreign commerce kind of go together. We want one level of government controlling that, and it's the federal government. And then the other sort of third big important thing here is conducting foreign affairs. What we don't want is individual states having their own foreign affairs, right? So we don't want Oklahoma out negotiating treaties with Mexico or something, right? Like, that won't work. So you have one level of government, the federal government, that conducts foreign affairs, and it's traditionally been placed within the executive branch with approval needed sometimes from the Senate. There's other things here like establishing who's a citizen. It is important, and it's, again, this is one of these things you want one level of government to have control over, because you don't want variation across the states. Postal system, right? There's a whole bunch of things. Declaring war, I guess maybe I shouldn't have said that the top three were most important here. Right? We don't want states declaring war either. These are the enumerated powers. You remember from Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. This last one here, the necessary and proper clause, or the elastic clause, is something we've talked about already. And then this regulating interstate and foreign commerce is frequently referred to as the Commerce Clause. There are some things that are denied the federal government, taxing state exports. So these are goods leaving a state to another state, aren't taxed by the federal government. The federal government can't unilaterally change state boundaries. They can, if there's a dispute, they can sort of regulate it, but they can't just say like, we're gonna lop off the panhandle and give it back to Texas or something. And they can't violate the Bill of Rights. Okay, state governments can regulate commerce within the state, but remember I said like the federal government takes a very expansive view of what counts as interstate, which is between states. And so some things that might look like intra-state within the state, the federal government will say like, well, we control it for X reasons. States conduct elections, and we've talked about why this is important in the Constitution chapter. Do a lot of sort of the like public health and these sorts of things. Again, like the national government can dip down in here, but a lot of these things are at the state government. And I say like they're kind of reserve powers, but the federal government can encroach on them. It's much harder for the other way around for state governments to encroach on federal powers. But remember, states ratify amendments to the Constitution, and then some powers that are denied that I probably touched on already, like taxing imports and exports. So that would be either interstate or foreign commerce. States can't make their own money, enter into treaties. And so just good to know, these are some powers given to the federal government, the states denied, and then there's a bunch that are actually concurrent or shared, collecting taxes, borrowing money. This borrow money might look like, oh, well, I'll say later on, states can't run a deficit, but they can still borrow money, and they do this with bonds. States and the federal government both have their own courts, they have their own banks, usually not state-run banks, but they can charter banks to run within the state. And they also can practice eminent domain, which is taking property with compensation. There's been some variation on that over the years too. So it's important to note too, the state powers, they're derived, if you want to look like where do they come from in the Constitution, it's the 10th Amendment. It says powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, or reserved to the states respectively or toward the people. So if the Constitution isn't explicit, like this is something the states, if it says this is something the states can't do, they can't do it. But if it's kind of silent on it, then the states can do those things. So the Constitution says, here's some things that explicit the federal government can do, which means generally the state governments cannot. And then it says explicitly, here's some things that the states can do. So there's been some amendments to the Constitution that affect federalism. Probably the most important is the 14th Amendment, and the 14th, 15th that I've talked about here come after the Civil War, but have longer importance. Have been important since then, so they're still used today. States cannot deny individuals rights which they are entitled by the Constitution, due process of law, or the equal protection of law. So this important part here is states can't deny individual rights. And so have you heard of the equal protection clause? This is it. So basically it says everyone needs to be treated equally under the law. So an example is marriage equality. So the Supreme Court case is one where it clearly, same-sex couples who wanted to get married were denied that right, and there was clearly just not equal treatment, right? If a man and a woman were allowed to marry, you can't deny that saying, if a same-sex couple wanted to marry, that they were getting different treatment. So you can sort of base your argument in the 14th Amendment. It's worth noting, even if you think like that's not equal treatment, it's not automatic. You need to win your case in court. So you need generally the Supreme Court to rule, if it gets appealed there, in your favor. So this is called incorporation. Sometimes it's called selective incorporation, where different rights, you might think like, oh, I should have these, but you need the court to rule. So you can use the 14th Amendment as the basis for your argument, but it's not automatic. So you need generally, you need to show that you're being discriminated against. So sometimes, like there was part of like the Civil Rights Act where it flipped this, where you didn't have to show you're being discriminated against. Sort of maybe states had to show they weren't discriminating, but for the most part, you need to show that you're being discriminated against, but you can use the 14th Amendment. I should say, like, I'm not a constitutional law professor or scholar, so take the common law course if you want to sort of dig deeper into how this works. 15th Amendment prohibits the federal government, each state, from denying a citizen, the right to vote based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude, basically saying, so if you were enslaved, you cannot be denied the right to vote. 19th Amendment is also about voting, giving women the right to vote, comes much later than the 15th Amendment. And the 26th Amendment gives 18-year-olds the right to vote. That's relatively recent. Well, as far as amendments go, relatively recent. Some other clauses in the Constitution that are important. Article 6, Clause 2 says the federal laws are the supreme law of the land, and we would have talked about this in the Constitution section. Sometimes they're ignored, but not always. So here's a picture of marijuana. According to the federal government, marijuana is illegal. You can buy it in lots of states, though, right? So, Oklahoma had a state question that legalized marijuana for medicinal purposes. It's clearly in contrast with federal law, and we're just pretending it doesn't exist. So the federal law is the supreme law of the land, but they could be ignored, right? So states could ignore them. If the federal government wanted to come in, and they do occasionally, will say, nope, like you're possessing marijuana. Say, for example, like at a post office, which is federal property, the federal government could, convict you or whatever. The other part actually about marijuana is the federal government has largely said, okay, states can do what they want with marijuana, except for banking. And they're working on this a little bit, but it's illegal. I think it's still currently illegal to sort of use wire transfers or electronic money transfers from money gotten from drug sales, well, illegal drug sales. So the marijuana industry is like largely a cash-based industry. So they're working to change that. And I think these reasons too are why you have a lot of these. There's some chains, but lots of like mom and pop dispensaries, because the big corporations like, it's still illegal federally. Like, what if we're a national corporation? How do we work these laws out? And I predict if the federal government either legalizes marijuana entirely or decriminalizes, whatever you want to call it, or changes the banking laws, we're going to see much larger chains sort of be running the dispensaries, or you can just buy it at CVS or something. Full faith and credit, states accept the court decisions, laws, and contracts of other states. So generally speaking, if you have like a contract that was signed in Oklahoma, another state has to accept that. Sort of, again, like I'm not an attorney, I'm not a common law scholar, so I'm sure there's like exceptions to some of this stuff. The Privileges and Immunities Clause says you can't discriminate out of staters. And again, that's sort of true. I don't know, I'll give an example. If you own a home in Oklahoma and you reside in Oklahoma, you get what's called a homestead exemption, which is like a little bit of savings on your property tax. But if you live somewhere else, like say you live, I don't know, in Texas and you own a home in Oklahoma, you don't get that. So like you're kind of being discriminated against, but you can't really have like one set of laws for people in Oklahoma and one set for everyone else. And maybe the homestead exemption, the way they work around that is primary residence versus secondary residence. I don't know. But anyways, you generally can't discriminate out of staters. Like you can't have an entirely different set of laws. Like an out of stater commits a crime and they can't have a different, like totally different set of laws for them than someone in state. Okay, so there's different types of federalism and sort of two main types. One is this dual federalism, and probably up until 1900s, the Depression, we kind of existed in this where state government and national government, sort of what we call, they presided over mutually exclusive, so separate, we call them spheres of sovereignty. So kind of the federal government did one set of things and left the states alone to do another set of things. And they did those kind of independently. So, you know, maybe the federal government focused on, you know, sort of foreign affairs, maybe some large level things about the economy, but for the most part, states were on their own to do what they want. Then we started to shift to what's called cooperative federalism, where the national and state governments jointly supply services. So this started to shift in things like the New Deal. So this is the Depression, the Great Society. This was under Lyndon Johnson in the 60s. Another example is maybe like the COVID bailout, right? Where basically what happens is the federal government gives money to the states to do things with sometimes with strings attached, sometimes without strings attached. But the federal government does have some say about what's going on. And so we've moved from dual to cooperative to perhaps we're even further along where the federal government you know, sort of has much more control over what happens in the states than it has previously. But the New Deal, Great Society, these are all like these really big programs that directed money to the states in areas where they formerly weren't involved. So you could think about retirement, like Social Security. You could think about like Medicare and Medicaid. You know, a lot of the programs under New Deal, the Tennessee Valley authorities were bringing electricity to areas. So that was much more work with the states and the federal government working together as opposed to the states going on their own. As I say, we moved from this mostly dual to mostly cooperative. Like, how did we get here? I have here, if you recognize this, Little House on the Prairie. Maybe you've read the books, maybe you've seen the TV shows. But the sort of Little House on the Prairie is, in some ways, it's like I think a good example of the transition where, you know, Ma and Pa Ingalls, they lived actually in Sleepy Eye, which I think is Minnesota. For the most part, they're kind of on their own, right? Like they run their farm. You know, if there's hail, I think there's hail like every season in Sleepy Eye, and like the crops get ruined. Ma and Pa are kind of on their own. Whereas now you might have, I think this is a thing, like national crop insurance, right? So the federal government might be able to help you. We certainly have a national agricultural policy, right, where the federal government is involved in agriculture. Once a season, Pa would fall and like break his ribs or something, and he would go to Doc Baker, and Doc Baker would fix him up, and Pa would pay with chickens or something. There's an episode where like Doc Baker says, "Look at all the chickens I got. Like, what am I supposed to do?" Anyways, fun fact: Doc Baker was actually a vet. It was not like a person doctor. He was a vet, but worked on all the people. Anyways, but there's no like national health insurance or even any laws about health insurance. It probably wasn't even health insurance. You got sick, you go to the doctor, you pay him money, or chickens. They had a daughter who was blind, and she went to a school for the blind. I think it was like a private school. The federal government certainly wasn't like funding schools for the blind where they might today. So all these things that like would happen on the farm or in their lives, the federal government wasn't involved, and hardly even state government. But things have changed since then. We've had a lot of nationalization. So one part actually might be like, they have their farm and they sell their goods. It goes on a train somewhere, and that becomes interstate commerce, right? So as the states start, especially the economies start working together and goods start moving all across the economy, we move away from states acting independently to the federal government being more involved. So, up until the Depression, you could sort of push on these states or whatever, but these localities or states were basically on their own, and you didn't need coordination. I used to have a whole lecture on like coordination problems, like you want to have the same set of laws for a lot of different things, especially when it comes to the economy. So here's an example that Europe used to have a problem with. Is you'd have a train that would leave France and it'd be on one set of rails, and then it would go to European geography. I don't know, Belgium maybe. We'll pretend that's next to France, and like the trains were on a different set of rails, and like that's not good. You have to lift the car off and put it on a different set of wheels or whatever, and so that's bad. So you want to have like all the trains run on the same set of rails. Same thing with like driving on the same side of the road. You don't have to switch when you get to different states. So you need this coordination. It makes commerce run better. Sometimes you got to race to the bottom, like potentially like minimum wage or something. So probably good for commerce and might be bad for individuals. You can argue that the minimum wage like reduces income, or definitely reduces income, but probably reduces employment. I don't know. I don't want to get into that, but someone's thinking that. So we've moved from this dual federalism to cooperative, where the federal government has just gotten much more involved. And have we moved into a next stage? I don't know. Ask the federalism scholars, but it's possible. We certainly haven't moved back the other direction, where states have become more powerful. So why do we nationalize? Sometimes it's just for like political advantage, right? So why does policy get shifted from the states to the federal government? Or why is the federal government, you can think of it this other way, more involved in state government? So an example is the Voting Rights Act. So I've said a few times this course, states run elections, and they still do. But the Voting Rights Act imposed some regulations on that. Regulations about redistricting, regulations about who can vote, especially African Americans having the right to vote, even though the 15th Amendment is based off of the former slaves were allowed to vote, that was still sort of not allowed a lot. So the Voting Rights Act put some teeth into this. And this is, why did they want to extend the franchise to more people? This is done by the Democrats. The Democrats thought, hey, here's this huge block of people, largely African Americans. If we can give them the right to vote, they're going to vote for us. And so it's purely like sort of political advantage. Now I should say there's also a lot of Republicans who voted yes in the Voting Rights Act. And the Democratic Party was split between the Southern Democrats who were no and Northern Democrats. But lots of times we give Lyndon Johnson the credit for this, who was a Democrat. So this was done largely for political advantage. The fact that it was the right thing, I don't know how much that entered into the calculation. Probably did. Healthcare, like thinking about the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare, was that done for political advantage? Maybe. Didn't help. At least this healthcare has gone up and down. Where, and I think we talked about this already, where initially they passed the Affordable Care Act, and like the Democrats were like punished for it at the polls, and then in 2018. The Republicans threatened to take it away, and then the Democrats were rewarded. So I don't know. Maybe Democrats think long-term providing health care will increase their partisan advantage. And then the federal government also passes national policy to solve these collective action problems. So we want to make sure everyone's doing the same thing. Just some examples here. Licenses for truckers is run by can be run by the federal government, or some part of it is. So you can imagine, like, say someone was a trucker in Oklahoma, and I don't know, they got their license taken away for being a bad driver or something. Like, we don't want them to then go to Texas and get a trucker license, right? Because lots of the trucking goes across states. So we want to have one set of rules for truckers driving who are going to be driving all across the country. There might be some like local truck things, but like I think the big trucks that you drive across country, although watch out, Tesla trucks, no drivers. But the federal government will probably also regulate that. The electrical grid, right? We want to all be like, we want to have the same, I don't even know what the words are here, like current, I guess, running across the electrical grid. But again, that's something that goes, you don't want like Oklahoma controlling its grid. It can shut off the power to Texas or something like that. Although there actually are some issues with that, I think out west. Minimum wage, the federal government sets a floor for minimum wage. Otherwise, I think states would just sort of bid each other down till you get to zero. Well, near zero. Probably not near zero. And then other things, we have sort of these national laws about food safety standards, right? We want to have some floor, and it's helpful to have the federal government set those. So you can go above and beyond these things, but the federal government sets the floor. And again, a lot of this is because of interstate commerce. Okay, so that's federalism. And so now we'll jump to state and local politics with some emphasis on like money, I guess. First we'll do states. So this talks about revenue, this chart. And so we'll look at the state chart here. Where do state governments get most of their money? A lot of it's through taxes. In that tax pot, so about half state government revenue comes from taxes, and then half of that half is sales tax, and some of that is individual income tax. And then they get some other from grants that comes from the federal government, and then some other things. So a big chunk of money from the states does come from the federal government. So that's a big way the federal government can sort of force states to do certain things is through money. You can't give a lecture on federalism without mentioning categorical grants, which have strict oversight. So they're very specific rules about how you're going to spend the money, and block grants, which might say you have to spend money on a certain thing, but with like not a lot of oversight and rules. So, you know, you could have a block grant for education. You need to spend, you know, this money on education, but within education, do however you want. Categorical grant would be very specific about how you would spend that money. We already talked about federal government and their money in first or second lecture of the course, so we'll skip that. And then where do local governments get their money? So this chart looks at sort of like a national average. So on this chart, most states get their money from property tax. Most local governments get their money from property tax, and then a little bit of sales tax, and then also a little bit, some localities have income tax, and then there's a pot from federal and state too. Oklahoma, especially for cities, it's a little different than county governments, but cities in Oklahoma, this is different than a lot of the country. The only way the bulk of the money they generate is through sales tax, which is why in Oklahoma, you know, there's a fight to get businesses to move to your locality. Although Norman sometimes pushes against this and wants more businesses. But anyways, localities in Oklahoma, especially local governments, so like local city governments, get their money from sales tax. So that's a little different. So that's why for a long time, actually, if you bought on Amazon, you didn't have to pay any sales tax. And that's changed, and it really benefits the state governments here. Just one thing to think about. So federal grants to state and local governments has really increased over time. So more and more money coming into state. There's been more and more money coming into states and local governments from the federal government over this long time period. Most of the money pays for healthcare things. So just a huge amount of what the government does is pay for healthcare. And you think about it, a lot of people don't even get their healthcare from the government, but a lot of the money that the government spends is on healthcare, and then a couple other things here. All right. So state governments, and with emphasis on Oklahoma. So I should say, like, if you want to pause, it's a good time to pause and take a break. I'm going to keep plowing ahead. It's easier on me. So state governments, there's tons of politics at state and local level, tons of fighting. If you ever want to see like local government politics, go on the Norman Ward Facebook pages, or think about, if you remember the Unite Norman fights, trying to recall the mayor and the ward council members. Local politics can be super intense, and same with state politics. So I had to pull myself off of the Facebook pages because I just would get caught up, and I don't know, I didn't trust myself not to say something stupid. Here I am recording lectures for 200 people. So what happens at state, local level? Education. So this picture here is from the teacher walkout from a few years ago, right? Even though the federal government has Department of Education, the bulk of what happens in education is controlled by the states, or even at the local level, not from the federal government. Criminal justice, so Oklahoma locks a lot of people up, and that's largely through Oklahoma laws, not federal laws. So if you want real criminal justice reform, it probably has to happen at the state level rather than the federal level. Things like wearing a mask, there's no national mask policy. There could be, but it's much easier done at the state or the local level, right? Oklahoma says it's up to the localities. Others, I don't know if other states actually have a statewide mask mandate. I think they might. If you want to open up a business, that's something that you do through the local government. And there might be some, you apply for permits and those sorts of things at the local level. There's not at the federal level. Federal laws might apply to your business, but actually to open it, to get your permit, even building a home, you need a permit, and that happens at the local level. Redistricting is also something that happens at the state level. There's some federal laws that apply, or federal rules laws that apply, yep. But it's the process that happens at the state level. Even things like who picks up your trash, that can be a local government thing. So here in Norman, the city hires a company to pick up our trash, and we pay a bill for it. But the local government decides, oh, Dr. Crespin, you live out in the far west side. That's too far for the recycling trucks to come, so we're not going to get your recycling. I'm not bitter about it at all. I love driving my recycling into town. Anyways, okay. If you, state government, they're generally set up similar to the federal government. So they have an executive branch, usually the governor. Something that's unique about some states, Oklahoma's one of them, is they have these statewide offices that are elected separately, or even the lieutenant governor is elected separately. So the federal government, president's the head of the executive branch and appoints lots of people in the executive branch. Some they're civil servants and the job carries over. But the heads of the agencies at the federal government are appointed by the president with approval for through the Senate. But in lots of states, there's statewide office that are elected separately. So states have an executive branch, they have a legislative branch. Everyone except for Nebraska has 2 chambers. And usually one of the chambers has fewer people, right? So think about like a House and a Senate. You have that in all the states except for Nebraska. States have judicial branches with some hierarchy of courts. Some states elect judges, some don't, sort of variations on that. Just real quick, glancing at the map. So the states that are in red are controlled by Republicans entirely. States that are purplish are controlled by Democrats, and then the green ones, there's a split control. So one, I think just a glance suggests we have the majority are Republican, I think, then split, and then some are total Democratic control. And actually that's just the legislature, so you could still have a different person in the governor's position. One reason why this is important is, and this will be more important after this next election is the states control redistricting. Some have commissions, and it's a little different, but states control redistricting. So the party, if there's unified partisan control of the state, then they can draw the districts for the next decade. And so they can try to lock in their partisan control. Doesn't always work, but they can try. Some states have term limits. And so what a term limit does is says the people serving the legislature can only serve so long. So some states do it like California, Oklahoma, Arkansas, where you can serve a number of years in either chamber, or both, I guess. If you maybe serve in one, then move to the other. You just have a total number of years you're allowed to serve in office. So California, Oklahoma, it's 12. Arkansas, it's 16. And then in these other states, you can serve 8 years in one chamber and then get elected to the other chamber and serve another 8 years. So you can sort of serve in one and then flip over to the other. Personally, I'm not a fan of term limits. So what term limit does is it doesn't let the people have a say in who's going to serve them in office. People say like, oh, we need term limits. We need to throw the bums out. Well, what do? You throw the bums out and you replace them with new bums. Sometimes representatives are great and, you don't want to lose them. Sometimes they're bad and you're kind of happy they leave or lose. But political science literature doesn't give us much evidence that term limits are good. Here's a general argument. Look at these states. Are these states with term limits run any better than states without term limits? You'd be hard pressed to make a case, I think. So term limits are not allowed at the federal level because you'd have to have a constitutional amendment to do it, because it's not in the Constitution says Constitution does not say members will be term limited, and they have to be explicit about that. Okay, so I'm going to run through part of this kind of quickly because you can just read the information. But so in the Oklahoma House of Representatives, so the lower chamber, 101 members, they all elected from districts. They don't make a lot of money. Their salary is $35,000 a year plus per diem. So members of the U.S. Congress make, I think it's like $174,000 a year. So it's much less. And this is actually kind of in the middle for different states. California, I think New York, you're in the six figures. Some states it's like 10 grand. Oklahoma legislature's in office or in session, from basically January through May. But it's not really a part-time job because you're always a member. You're only in session for part of the year, but you're always a member. Okay. Serve 2-year terms in the lower chamber. Republicans have controlled the House since 2004, and a lot of the time they had a supermajority, so like 75% of the chamber. Usually, and I'll show you why it's important in a minute. So right now we have 77 Republicans, 23 Democrats, and 1 vacancy. At least whenever I wrote this, I don't know, a couple weeks ago. Trying to think if I'm going to give this. Will you see this lecture? Yeah, before the election. So this will change in November. Well, when members are sworn in. In 2018, we had this huge 46 newly elected representatives in the chamber, and things like the attitude changed for a little bit, and then it sort of went away. But that's like a large number of new people in a chamber. The Speaker of the Oklahoma House is Charles McCall. And 4 members will be term limited in 2020. We just talked about term limits. So that's the House, the lower chamber, upper chamber of the Senate. There's 48 members, make the same amount of money. Incidentally, it's a board that determines how much money the members make. They can't vote themselves a raise. So there's this commercial that said like Stephanie Bice voted herself a pay raise. Like she can't do that because this board does it. And in fact, a couple of years ago, the board voted them a pay decrease because they're like, you're really not doing a good job. You're going to make less money. I think it was up to 38, and then it dropped down. The Senate serves 4-year terms, but they're staggered. So half the Senate is up for re-election in say 2020, and then 2022 the other half is up. So the body is continuous, is what they would say. Republicans have controlled this body since 2008. 38 Republicans, 9 Democrats, and 1 vacancy. So again, sort of this heavily controlled by the Republicans. We got some members who are term limited coming up. The president pro tem presides over the Senate, and that's Greg Treat. And then the Lieutenant Governor, Matt Pinnell, is technically the president of the Senate. Oh, sorry, I repeated myself about the term limits there, but at least that was accurate. Okay, so that's the legislative branch. The governor is the head of the executive branch. He serves 4-year terms, and it's 2-year term limits. Makes much more money. You know, considered a full-time job, I guess. So he's head of state, chief executive. So he sort of fills all these roles or some of the roles that the executive serves at the presidential level. Commander-in-chief of the Oklahoma National Guard. By the Constitution says will deliver a State of the State address to the legislature on the first day of the session, and you can go and sit in the chamber and watch this if you want. Signs or vetoes legislation, has a line item veto. So this is unique compared to the presidency. So line item veto means the governor, especially in a sort of a appropriations bill with the budget, could say like, well, I approve these parts of the bill, but not these parts. So at the federal level, the president can either veto the whole bill or sign the whole bill. Governors frequently have line item veto where they can veto parts of it. So perhaps the majority of the bill can become law, and then some parts are vetoed. These are the other sort of elected executive branch officers. So something you can get because you can elect executive branch officers separately is they could be from the other party. They're not currently, but they could be. So there's Pinnell, who's lieutenant governor. I felt pretty old when like he came to OU and I gave him a tour of the Carl Albert Center. I'm like, yeah, he's younger than me. He's lieutenant governor. Like, that makes me feel old. But anyways, Joy Hoffmeister has been the superintendent of public instruction for quite a while. You know, some of these folks have been in office quite a while, and they might be in office after the governor because they're elected separately. So I guess they don't have term limits. I don't know that, but I don't think they do actually. The governor can appoint with some Senate confirmation, a whole bunch of other people up to 15. And I'm not going to go through these, but you can just see like, here's some other offices we have in our executive branch. Okay, so how does a bill become a law in Oklahoma? Oh, sidebar real quick. I teach a course called Capital Scholars, where if you want to do internships in the Oklahoma legislature, we have a course, you can get credit, pretty good program. A couple members, a couple students who did the course went on to like serve in the legislature, which is kind of cool. Anyways, okay, so how does a bill become a law in Oklahoma? So the session starts. So I'd say one thing that's unique about Oklahoma compared to the federal government is our lawmaking process operates under a series of deadlines, whereas under federal government, you kind of have 2 deadlines, start a session and end a session. That's about it that really matters for deadlines. Okay, so the session starts at noon on the first Monday in February, and then it lasts until 5 p.m. on the last Friday in May. Sometimes they'll finish a little early if they're done, I guess. Members will sort of file their bill requests in December. So in December, they say, these are the bills I'm going to write. It sort of gives the leadership time to figure out what's going on. Then in January, the bills are introduced. So they have to write the bills that are introduced. You might say like, well, what happens if like something comes up, we need a new bill we didn't think about? You can write what's called a shell bill, which has a title but no language. And so it's empty, right? The shell could be empty, and you can fill in the language of the bill later. Only so many bills per member can be sent to committee. So we have the entire chamber, and then we break the chamber down into areas of jurisdiction, like maybe education or transportation. There's a committee for that. So it's a limited number of bills that get sent to committee per member. So they can't like have like 100 bills to committee. So if you write a bill and doesn't go to committee, it's dead. Okay, so then committee will hear your bill. They vote on it. If it passes committee, it goes to the floor. They could hear your bill and vote on it. If it passes there, we do what calls crossover. So the Senate works on their bills, the House works on their bills, and there's a set date where the bills cross over to the other chamber. So I have here, there's deadlines for each step. So there's a certain date, and it changes a little bit each year, that says if a bill's not out of committee by this date, it's dead. If a bill hasn't passed the floor by a certain date, it's dead. And bills don't automatically pass or get a hearing in committee or get heard on the floor. I think they automatically cross over, but that doesn't mean if they pass the floor in one chamber, that doesn't mean they're going to get heard in committee or the floor of the other. Okay, so general process. Bill starts in, let's say it starts in the House, goes to committee, passes the committee, and then it goes to the floor. If it gets heard on the floor, it gets a vote. If it passes, then it crosses over, and it starts over in the other chamber. So this House bill then goes to a Senate committee. If it passes Senate committee, it goes to the Senate floor. If it passes the floor, if it's been changed, so it's different from the House bill, then you need conference committees. You need to sort of hammer out the differences. So you have to have the same bill passed both chambers. Then it goes to the governor, and the governor can sign or veto. Like I said, there's deadlines for each step. Some other sort of things about Oklahoma, similar to lots of states, has to have a balanced budget. And so what it has is it has a board of equalization that says how much money it is allowed to spend. I should say there was a dispute this year in the legislature, I forget it was about, between the legislature and the governor about, I think, how much money was going to go into the rainy day fund. And so the governor was saying the board of equalization wasn't allowed to meet to decide how much money you can spend. But anyways, this board, which is controlled by the governor, says, here's the amount of money that the state is allowed to spend this year. And they have to balance the budget. So they can't run a deficit. So they're actually only allowed to spend, I mean, it's like 90% or 95% of the money they think they're allowed to spend. Tax increases, and this is very unique to Oklahoma, have to be approved by 3/4 of both chambers or vote of the people. And so this is something that was put in by a state question. So the voters of Oklahoma said, if the legislature is going to raise our taxes, they need a supermajority, 3/4 of both chambers. Going back to before, I think I said, like, sometimes Republicans have a supermajority, so they could raise taxes just on one party if they wanted to, but usually they don't. So they need Democratic votes. So we had a tax increase a couple of years ago, and they needed the supermajority. I think this is dumb. So you might need to raise revenue for certain things, and needing 3/4 majority is a very high majority to get and pretty hard. And so I think it's not good for the state to tie its hands like that. People might disagree. They say, well, we should just spend less money. And that's a reasonable position to take. I think there's some areas, and I'll show you in a second, where maybe we should spend some more money, but we have to get it. And to get it, you need to raise taxes. If there's extra money, it goes into the rainy day fund, and like some percent goes in there anyways as well. You can also pass laws and constitutional amendments via state question. So the people, the state, get to vote on this directly, right? We don't have these national referenda, but it's something we do at the state level. The legislature, so either to get on the state ballot or state question, you either need to gather signatures, or the legislature can put questions on the ballot too. Just real quick, like where does the money come from in Oklahoma? So let's just look at fiscal year 2019. This is the most recent one I have data for. So the biggest pot of money comes from personal income taxes. The next pot of money comes from sales tax. So personal income tax, sales tax, this is money coming from us. This pot, so the gross production tax, right? So we think Oklahoma, like, we're an oil state. We actually don't get a lot of money compared to income tax and sales tax from oil directly. So oil and gas money mostly comes via income taxes and sales tax, right? So you work for an oil and gas company, you earn money, you pay income tax, you buy things, you pay sales tax. So when the oil and gas industry is doing poorly, those people lose their jobs and they don't have income tax, they buy fewer things, and they don't pay sales tax. So that most of the money that comes from oil in the state is indirect. I'm always surprised at how low this number is. We did recently raise the gross production tax. How much money do we spend? A lot, I guess. I don't know, but it's decreasing over time. So if you look from fiscal year 2006, we've had, or maybe 2007, there's been a decrease. It's popped up a little bit the last couple of years, but oops, next year it's going to be down. So I think we're going to have less money to spend. But general sort of decrease in the amount of money. And some of that is there's a decrease in taxes in here. So there's a tax cut, so less money coming in, less money going out. And then at the end here, maybe it was 18, they passed a tax increase, so the money increases a little bit. Where do we spend money in Oklahoma? Biggest pot is Common Ed. So this is like high school, elementary school, those sorts of things. That's Common Ed. That's the biggest pot. 10% goes to higher ed, $802 million. Let's put this in perspective though. The OU Norman budget is $1 billion. The entire amount of the money the state spends for higher ed is less than that. So only about 11% of the money that OU Normans, that doesn't include like the med school spends, comes from the state. So we need money from tuition, grants, federal government, other places. So big picture, the state does not spend a lot of money on higher ed. And so OU Norman's a flagship school in the state. It's able to generate revenue again through tuition and other ways. Some other schools across the state, like smaller schools, are much more dependent upon this pot of money and tuition. Anyways, so the state doesn't spend a ton, I don't think, on higher ed. Currently, about 12.5% of the budget goes to Medicaid, but we just passed Medicaid expansion, so this will likely increase with a huge influx of money from the federal government, and then some from the state, which is us, me and you. Just think this is worth throwing up here. What has happened to the spending for higher ed over time? This is fiscal year 2008 to 2015. I'm the most recent I saw this. So what's the change in spending? Oklahoma is the biggest decrease in spending. So almost 24% decrease in spending for higher ed. So if you're wondering, like, actually for most of you, your tuition has not increased, but in years past, they've increased tuition year over year. And that's largely because the amount of money coming from the state has decreased, so they need to make it up somewhere else. So they do it on tuition or fees or whatever. Probably juniors and seniors, you've probably had your tuition go up, but it's held steady for the last couple of years. We have this reserve fund where I said the rainy day fund, I guess, and there's a couple other reserve funds. Last year, it's gone up over time, so that's pretty good. Like the state's been pretty good about putting money away, but I think next year it's gonna probably almost disappear. So, because we're in a, COVID crisis thing here. Okay, so if you want to pause, another spot to pause. Finally, we'll talk about local politics with an emphasis on Norman. So the U.S. Constitution doesn't say anything about the dispersion of power between states and localities within each state. So this is a state government thing, not a federal government thing. There's this thing called Dillon's Rule, where cities and towns exist at the pleasure of the state. So you might think about, like, there's a supremacy clause, usually within state constitutions, where the state law is supreme over local laws. I think some states, governments, if they wanted to, could like have a town or city like disappear. I don't know how that would work. That'd be kind of interesting to watch. Maybe unless it was my town, then it'd be bad. There's this thing called home rule. Lets localities make policy and tax decisions, right? So Norman can make policy and tax decisions, like we pay a water tax, and like the trash, you can think of it as a tax in exchange for service. But there's preemption. So the state governments can pass laws banning localities from doing certain things. So for example, Norman, the city council thought, like, hey, let's ban plastic bags. State government caught wind of that, and they're like, let's just pass a law that says localities can't ban plastic bags, and that's called preemption. There's been other preemptions about oil and gas. So, the city of Norman can't say you're no longer allowed to, extract oil and gas within Norman. There's a state law that says localities can't ban that. City governments, there's largely two ways to set up city governments. There's the mayor-council system, where voters elect a mayor, and a city council separately. The council, you think of the council as like a legislature, and you can think of the mayor like a governor, where they run the executive branch. And the powers can vary, but like the mayor becomes pretty powerful. I think New York City is run this way, where there's a powerful mayor. And then the council is like a legislature that can pass legislation. That's one system. The one we have in Norman is city manager, where the people vote for a council and a mayor. And then the council and the mayor appoint a city manager who runs the day-to-day operations of the government. So under the mayor-council system, the mayor really runs like the executive branch of the government and all the day-to-day operations of the local government. A council manager, like we have in Norman, so Bria Clark is mayor. She and the city council elect the city manager, Darrell Pyle, and he runs the government. Now, the council does policy. So the council might say to the city manager, like, we want to do X, and they have to vote to do it. And then the city manager makes that happen. But the council can't do things like hire and fire people beyond the city manager. So the council and the mayor hire the city manager, and the city manager hires everyone else. So like, I don't know, say you're building a house and you want some push in the permit office, the mayor can't really do anything. Because the mayor can't threaten to fire whoever runs the permit office. City manager can, and Darrell wouldn't. Darrell's great. He's good for civic engagement. He hosts interns. I also, the Carl Albert Center hosts an internship for students in local government, if you're interested. That's in the fall. So anyways, there's two types of governments, and the sort of big differences in one, the mayor runs the day-to-day operations of the government, and the other one, the city manager does. So if the council doesn't like how the day-to-day operations are running, their only option is really is to, force the city manager to do something. They could say, well, we'll fire you, but they can't fire anyone else. And then there's county governments that I don't know much about, so we won't talk about them, but they do things too. Here in Oklahoma, county governments do the roads. So if you have a problem with the roads, it's county governments. Just real quick, here's the org chart in Norman. We have the citizens, the authority comes from us. We give it to city council. They hire the city manager, and everyone else is underneath the city manager. And there's these boards and commissions that the council can appoint. Maybe the mayor appoints some of them. Anyways, they're just oversight, but they don't have any real authority. Here's our councilors. This is the ward map here in Norman. So we have different wards. We have this big ward out on the east side of town, and the east side of town is more rural. They tend to, I don't know, vote against whatever like the orange ward here wants. So the core of Norman. I'm in Ward 3. Sometimes we vote with the east side because we're rural too. Where's the money come from? 60% comes from sales tax. Sorry, this is blurry. I just could not get it to come out nicer. But anyways, 60% of the revenue for Norman comes from sales tax, and then like slice and dice of other things here. Where does it get spent? Big chunk, 27%, is on police, and then another big chunk on public works, and then some on fire, and then the rest is, again, slice and diced. So police get a big share of the budget. That's it. So if you want to look at more details about Norman or the Oklahoma legislature, you can follow these links. All right.